Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's 1-800-BEAT-IRS. They've been serving Alaskans, Americans since 78 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys ready to take care of all your issues with the IRS. We have a waiting caller, Karen. Thank you for staying with us, being patient. Karen, what are your thoughts?
Well, I listened to your introduction, and I just have to say it's a heartbreaking story. It's trending all over Facebook. Christians are, rightly very upset about this situation. And you're correct. She is under a contempt charge right now. And I posted under your story that you posted, there's a link to a petition for the judge to release her, and I wanted to call in and share the judge's number, too. We need some people that are willing to take a stand, be proactive in this situation, and I have the judge's name and number.
Yeah, go ahead. Give it out.
His name is David Bunning, Bunning, and his phone number is 859-392-7907. And I did have a quick question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
In a SCOTUS case, like on this marriage situation, is it the judge's prerogative to recuse themselves? Because really, how did Kagan and Ginsburg, who have both performed gay marriages, how come they did not recuse themselves or were somehow not forced to recuse themselves for conflict of interest in that case? And then we wouldn't be here where we are today, and Judge Scalia addressed this very issue of what's happening.
Right. In fact, it would have been a 4-3 decision had they recused themselves. I wrote an article on that, Karen, suggesting, because I used to be a U.S. magistrate judge under the Code of Ethics, and they're pretty much a self-policing body. In other words, there's not really a superior body that can enforce the ethics that judges comply with or are supposed to comply with, called the Code of Judicial Conduct. So really the only consequence that they have is potentially impeachment. And, of course, the lack of backbone that we're seeing right now in the Congress. I mean, it's non-existent. They won't even stand up and defund these agencies they need to. So the likelihood that they'd actually hold any of these justices to account for clear conflicts of interest, I mean, there is absolutely no question that when, you've got Ginsburg going up, not just doing the marriage, but also making statements during one of the marriage ceremonies stating by the U.S. Constitution or some words like that, and emphasizing them clearly with kind of an eye toward the decision that was going to come. In other words, she was letting everybody know how she was going to rule. Yet another violation of the Code of Conduct for judges. In at least contemporary society, many of these federal agencies, many of the federal bodies that we're dealing with don't seem to really care about the law anymore. Rule of law seems to be so distant from their modus operandi. Instead, they're thinking about, this is what I want to make certain happens, the political objective, damn the consequences, damn the torpedoes. We're headed that way whether or not the law is complicit.
Well, I got a chuckle out of who's the White House spokesperson right now. He came out and made a comment against this Kim gal, and then that's basically what he said. He talked about following the rule of law, and I'm like, really? Shouldn't you put an exemption in there for, let's see, all your D.C. employees, your alphabet agencies, your Secretary of State, your POTUS, your Congress? They seem to be an exception to that fact. They live above the rule of law. And anyways, I was just really concerned about this situation, so I'm looking forward to listening to your next guest.
Absolutely, and we've got Daniel Horowitz right now on the line standing by. He wrote a great article yesterday about Kim Davis entitled Kim Davis as the Modern-Day Rosa Parks. And let me just, by way of background, also introduce Mr. Horowitz. He's a senior editor at Conservative Review. We feature him very frequently on Restoring Liberty. Excellent writing. Exposes the shenanigans of the establishment, and also very insightful about some of the changes that are happening, especially with the Supreme Court, and how this may actually impact those of faith in the future. Daniel, thanks for agreeing to come on the show and talk about this important issue.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me as always.
Did you think this was going to happen? I mean, even her attorneys, at least by reports today, were pretty shocked about the jailing. I mean, that just seems to be a step beyond.
It's funny because that's the one thing I'm not shocked about. I'm not shocked that the courts responded that way. What I am shocked about is that someone actually had the guts to go all the way, and my heart goes out to her. I don't even know where to begin. I could tell your audience that even before this Kim Davis thing happened, I was in the process of writing a book titled Disenfranchised, and it was how the courts have taken their activism to such a new level where now ostensibly, if you juxtapose their Obamacare decisions, the marriage and immigration decisions that you're seeing very recently, the overarching theme is that the Constitution is unconstitutional. Judicial activism has been around for 50, 70 years in its current form, but we are now living through the nightmare scenario where things are worse. They cannot get any worse, and we cannot take it anymore. Let's just start with the concept from Hamilton. A lot of people wonder, why is there no recourse? What do you mean? It's like there's no check on them. They're the final say. But on the other hand, they're not even elected. That's the point. They were supposed to have neither force nor will, in the words of Hamilton, as it relates to fundamental political societal issues. They're supposed to adjudicate bankruptcy disputes and disputes between states and esoteric separation of powers issues. They were never supposed to even have the jurisdiction over this stuff. So that's why, precisely because they weren't political, they weren't constrained by the checks and balances on politics, namely, elections, lifetime appointment, and there was no kind of mechanism to overrule their decision because it's not a decision. It's a legal opinion on what the Constitution refers to as cases and controversies. They weren't meant to redefine marriage since it was around. They weren't meant to violate our sovereignty by granting illegal aliens. I wrote about this last week, Second Amendment rights. I mean, it's almost like the inalienable rights that are there are stripped out. You can't get more inalienable than religious liberty. That is literally in the Declaration of Independence. Natural law, nature is God. That is the core of First Amendment. And that is being swapped out and being forced to yield to Anthony Kennedy's man-made diatribe, man-made contrived rights that are not only not in the Constitution and not in the Declaration, they are antithetical to natural law and nature as God, which is the antecedent to the very rights they are trying to newly assert. In other words, whatever you think of homosexuality, I mean, natural law, when you talk about, there's nothing more counter to natural law than saying that that's a marriage. You can't even procreate. But the notion that a state, which passes a marriage law by 75%, the federal government has no jurisdiction and mentions marriage nowhere in the Constitution, they act lawless, and she is upholding the law for 27 years in her state. We're living in Absurdistan here.
Yeah, it amazes me that there have not been, and you said it amazes you, we actually found somebody actually stood up to the point of being jailed for her beliefs on this issue. It surprises me that there have not been more state officials that have actually, especially in Kentucky, that would actually stand behind her and offer her support. I mean, that was one of the suggestions that constitutional law attorney Herb Titus made, was that, look, what really should have happened here, once she stood up and said, look, I'm not going to comply with this illegitimate decision, or even if she expressed herself due to her religious beliefs, that the governor should have actually given her some backup on it. But there's nobody doing that. And so, when you're talking about how the current jurisprudence,
and where the hell is Mitch McConnell?
Is that a joke?
I mean, he is the senator from there. He's the majority leader.
Yeah, well, you would think you would at least get a rhetoric moment out of it, right? I mean, that's what he's all about. That's all he's good for, is the rhetoric. I mean, when it actually comes to action, he's far from the field, or he's out there kind of deceiving people into thinking he's actually doing something. But yeah, I guess the point is that when you say that modern jurisprudence has effectively made the Constitution unconstitutional, that, the Bill of Rights, they really have no impact. The primary, the First Amendment, religious freedom, minimized in place of these man-made rights. And you would think that some would finally say, this is it. Enough is enough. We're going to exert our rights as states, the authority that we have vested under the Constitution, and we're going to say no more. And we've had folk on this program before that have said, and part of the problem, Daniel, of course, is that we now look at the federal government as just all-powerful. In some respects, there is a lot of power there. But still, I mean, the majority of government throughout the United States is state and local government. If the states actually said to the federal government, no more. We are going to, within our own borders, do the things that the Constitution allows us to do. I mean, it would probably, if you just had one state, the feds would make an example financially out of that state at the very minimum. But you would think that there would be some courage demonstrated, given what at least I'm hearing, even on social media. I mean, people are just outraged over this, and yeah, it's probably a minority. But still, there is enough going on as far as pushback that you would expect at least a handful of state leaders to back these folk up.
Exactly. But here, the problem is we are living in the nightmare scenario, the breakdown of our constitutional republic, in which the courts, and it's amazing, they're declaring the Constitution unconstitutional, but they're using our system against us. So everyone has in their mind, I mean, look, as much as I disagree, it's kind of preposterous decision there, but gosh, the Supreme Court's the law of the land, it's a final say. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. The problem with that mentality is, where do you draw the line? If you don't want to draw it now, let me tell you, you're going to be drawn that, because there is enough screwy jurisprudence out there to now grant judicial amnesty to illegal aliens. Forget about Obama, just straight up from the court, that an illegal will petition for a green card. Would a USCIS agent be tasked with issuing a green card to an illegal?
Yeah, gotta go to break, Daniel. Here with Daniel Horowitz talking about the tyrannical federal courts. Back after this. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by our friends at the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com, BEAT-IRS, finding the modern-day Gestapo. So we're talking with Daniel Horowitz. He's a senior editor at Conservative Review. Of course, the big news today, Kim Davis, the Kentucky court clerk, put in jail because she's refusing to issue homosexual marriage licenses. We've been talking about the illegitimacy of so many decisions coming out of the federal court system. The Supreme Court, of course, making the decision on gay marriage, which indirectly led to what happened with Kim Davis down in Kentucky, the fact that they're making out new rights out of whole cloth that are infringing upon the fundamental rights that our founders intended to be guaranteed through the Bill of Rights. We were talking during the break, Daniel, about a recent decision by a federal court relating to a felon illegal alien that the federal court is refusing to deport. Tell our audience why.
Exactly. Just to preface, the way you see that the courts are nakedly political is that they have a double standard. Normally, in the past, when you had activist judges, there was a method to their madness. As much as we disagreed with it, it would strike against us 80% of the time. But 20% of the time, let's say that they're really open to rights. So, well, they're open to religious liberty rights, or they're really, sticklers to rule of law, too much, or whatever it is, or they have a very loose system standard for standing to sue. So, sometimes it works against us with environmental groups, but it should work for us with suing Obama on amnesty. What you have going on in the country right now is the most foundational right of religious liberty is being infringed upon by the court. You have illegal aliens who have no right to be here, who are breaching our sovereignty, which is the most, you want to talk about power. Congress's power over immigration, over our sovereignty, is 100 years of case law, settled law. That is the courts, from the late 1800s, early 1900s, they called it the most profound settled law in the Constitution. Yet courts are now saying that those who come here in contravention to our laws they have all sorts of rights. Not just regular illegals, the most violent criminal aliens. Kim Davis is being put in jail for Christian beliefs. Criminal illegal aliens are being let out of jail by the courts and being dispersed into our population with no way of tracking them. I'm reading just a Daily Caller article from now. A federal appeals court has ruled that an illegal immigrant and convicted felon cannot be deported back to Mexico because he identifies as a transgender woman, which leaves him vulnerable to torture back in his home country. So he is a convicted felon, meaning not just here illegally, he clearly did something bad too, and he will be let out of jail by the court in violation of our sovereignty. I don't know what to say anymore.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling. It's lawless.
How the hell does he even have the standing to sue in court?
Unbelievable. Yeah, I don't have an explanation for you other than the fact that the law no longer matters. It doesn't.
And one more juxtaposition, Joe. I was just saying that while the illegals have standing to sue in court, you know who doesn't have standing? ICE agents and Sheriff Arpaio, the sheriff of the fourth largest county in the country, and it's on the border, does not have standing, according to the D.C. appellate court now, to sue Obama on DACA with his jurisdiction being flooded with more criminals. This is mentally ill.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows? Tomorrow it won't be mentally ill. It'll be something celebrated. I just can't help myself. It is a world upside down. I mean, that really is what it boils down to. And it just seems, and there are so many good folk in this country. I mean, people that call into this program, people that I talk to on the street, it just doesn't make sense that the country can continue to move in this direction unabated. It seems every day the crazy gets worse. What is the answer? I mean, look at attitudes on gay marriage, for example. I mean, some would argue that the nation has changed. It's one of the reasons why judges are getting away with this, because really, foundationally, people really don't see gay marriage as a big deal anymore. And yet, in many of these locales where it's happening, it's still supermajorities of the people that are against that. I think you look at the illegal alien issue. This is even clearer. The majority of the country on both sides of the aisle is against illegal aliens coming into this country unabated. They'd be outraged over that federal court, the appellate court's decision that you just mentioned, and yet they continue to do it. It's as if the elites don't care. The people don't matter. What could we do to send a signal to them that it does matter and that, in fact, they can't continue to violate their oaths of office as they are?
That's a tough question to answer. I mean, we've let this fester for half a century, and it has now ratcheted up and culminated in a nightmare scenario. So, I mean, there's going to have to be a line. If people aren't comfortable with Kim Davis, at some point you're gonna have to feel comfortable. You're gonna have to draw a line in civil disobedience. Keep in mind, everyone's focusing on the fact that she's a government official. Well, I got news for you. There's plenty of people with their private property, the Oregon baker, the Iowa Mennonite family. There's a case in Colorado, all over the place, where people with their own private business, own private family farm, are being forced to use it to service something that violates their religious conscience. So you can't say, oh, well, they're a government official and they are bound by the Supreme Court. I mean, at some point, the civil disobedience is going to have to come in. In the long run, what needs to happen is jurisdiction stripping. Let me just say, if something appears to be despotic, you're not missing something, and it shouldn't be that way. There's the framers never set up a system where we have no recourse to our elected representatives to rectify something. And they say, oh, well, I mean, the Supreme Court is the final law of the land. Article 3, Section 2, as you well know, Joe, it provides for exemptions or exceptions and regulations. The Congress could regulate the jurisdiction of the courts. Now, they can't retroactively undo a ruling that was done, but what they can do is cut the legs out from under the lower courts and the Supreme Court by saying they no longer have jurisdiction to adjudicate societal issues. And you'd have to write it more specifically. Let's just say they don't have jurisdiction to adjudicate cases dealing with the definition of marriage, nor do they have jurisdiction over overturning immigration enforcement laws. Let's just, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but they could write that Article 2, Section 3. What would happen at that point is, let's say in this case, a clerk would say, hey, I'm not doing this. So the district court could not then apply precedent because the ruling would only be binding on Obergefell and the three others who are a party to it. But everyone else, it could never get off the ground. They could cut the legs out from under them. We need to strip the courts of their jurisdiction. Otherwise, elections won't matter because the courts have stripped the ball away from us and they've taken the authority to decide all political and societal issues now.
I mean, arguably already elections don't matter. I mean, you ask the people in Alabama that voted 75-80% against gay marriage several years ago. And, of course, that's happened all across the country. Now over 30 states have had their democratic elections set aside in favor of this man-made right that Justice Kennedy had expressed in that very offensive decision. And so I think there's already a lot of that there that has left so many people disgruntled over, the way that the system is. The danger, of course, that we're faced with, Daniel, is that so many people have said now it really doesn't matter. Should I even stay engaged because of what we see going on? It seems that no matter how hard I fight, that the establishment, they're always one step ahead with some other cheat, some other game that keeps our efforts from actually having impact on the political process. What do you say to those people that have been so engaged and they see very little reflection from their effort?
Well, look, it's certainly a valid sentiment, because, again, when you let something fester, when you let lawlessness fester for half a century, it's very hard to undo that, because it establishes a lot. Right now, the precedent is the Constitution is unconstitutional. So what do we do? I mean, the one thing I will say is that there's a rubber band effect in politics. As dark as it is, that creates opportunity for light, in the sense that Obama has been so radical and so fringe, and just the Obama-era lawlessness, his allies, his courts, his cheerleaders outside of government, they are so repulsive to middle America that our side is more militant than ever and more committed than ever, and we are changing hearts and minds. As you see by the midterm elections, clearly the people are with us, and you see from the Donald Trump phenomenon, whatever you think of him personally, but what he is perceived as representing is certainly reflective of a great awakening. And I think now would be the absolute wrong time to sit it out. Now is the time to engage in the Republican primary. Look, I'm not endorsing here. I'm just singling out. People should read Ted Cruz's statement. That took balls. He said, "Oh yeah, Kim Davis should resign when the mayor of San Francisco resigns for thwarting federal immigration law, and when Obama resigns for nullifying congressional statutes on immigration." So, with all the thumbsuckers on the conservative side saying, "Oh my gosh, you can't disobey a court order," and we have a major presidential candidate willing to stand up, that might be a horse to ride, and we don't want to pull our forces out now. But we are on a final straw, and if we don't change it in this election, we're screwed.
Well, I got to tell you, I hope that those words, those strong words, the rhetoric that we hear is backed up with action, because it would take just a couple of senators to really gum things up until people put the heat on the federal judiciary. And that's the problem here, is that, we get a lot of rhetoric, we get some strong words, but we don't really see too many people that are willing to make the same sort of calls individually in the Congress, like what Kim Davis did as a county clerk. And I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take people willing to stand up to the establishment, stand up to McConnell, stand up to Boehner, more than just 25 this time in the House, to make things happen. I mean, otherwise we're going to continue to see the same thing happen, where this in military terms is just a rearguard action. We're just slowing the onslaught. We aren't actually reversing direction. To reverse direction, it's going to require sacrifice. It's going to require people that don't just have the rhetoric, but they actually do something to change the scenarios that are taking place. One person, even in the Senate, could gum it up enough to make people focus in a way that they need to turn back, basically the heat on Kim Davis. Why not have somebody just say, we're going to have a group of 5 of us? Just simply effectively stop the funding mechanism for the United States until the courts and their jurisdiction is limited. That's just kind of an out there suggestion, but they have the capacity to do it. The problem is that nobody is willing to take the severe heat at the federal level necessary to put a stop to this garbage.
No, because our side has validated their game, has validated their lawless structure, their lawless rules. So they're rigged. We can't win. So let's just tie in some other things. News of the day, Iran and Planned Parenthood. The Republicans validated the process of turning the treaty clause up on its head, so they ensured their loss on that. And with Planned Parenthood in the budget fight, they are validating the notion that as long as Democrats are opposed to something, they have to give into it, because otherwise there'll be a government shutdown. I guess we'll never get anything.
A single individual, even a handful of individuals in the Congress, can make an impact. The question is whether or not they're willing to take the real heat that's going to come down if they do it. And that's really the question that individual senators, representatives are going to have to ask themselves. Is the time important enough now that they take that kind of a stand? Because people like Kim Davis need some reinforcements. Daniel, I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate your writing on this subject. We'll have you back. Keep up the good work and look forward to that book that's coming out.
Lots of fun. Thanks so much.
Stay with us. Be back right after these messages.